Hi, welcome to Bad Takes. I'm Laura McGann, the executive editor of Grid, and I'm here with my co-host, Matthew Iglesias. He is a contributing editor to Grid. Hey, Matt.
Hello, what's going on?
Well, today I have a bad take I want to run by you.
Okay, let's hear it. What's bad in takes?
Okay, so let me just set it up a little bit, which is that this bad take is in response to a Fetterman interview. He's running for senator in Pennsylvania. He is the candidate who had a stroke back in May, and he has started doing interviews again. And as part of his recovery from his stroke, he is dealing with a sort of audio comprehension problem, which is apparently somewhat common with people who are recovering from a stroke. So to understand a conversation, he uses subtitles or captions as he's talking with somebody. And this NBC News reporter aired her interview with him, and you can see him kind of glancing at these captions while she's talking. And he seems, to me, but my assessment, I think most people were saying this, that he seemed lucid, fluid, just fine with the captions. After the episode or the interview aired, NBC had a little clip of her saying, before the interview started, he was not able to follow this small talk we were having.
Because the captions weren't on.
Correct. It wasn't set up. And so he was having difficulty kind of following the conversation. And this inspires a backlash where conservatives are saying, many conservatives were saying, this is ridiculous. You can't have a U.S. senator who can't, comprehend small talk, et cetera. And then I think a mix of reporters on the left and just other reporters, reporters who had spoken to Fetterman were sort of defending him, saying it's not that he can't comprehend small talk. He understands when he's using this tool. So that's the fight that's happening. The bad take I want to get at is represented by this tweet that I pulled up here from Ian Millhiser, he's a reporter at Fox. He is a friend of the show, or Matt and me. And so anyway, here we go, Ian. His tweet says, "Is it the position of NBC News that a senator with glasses cannot be trusted in office because they use assistive technology to accommodate their disability?" Let's stop there. I think it catches the gist of what I think is a bad take in response to this saga.
So, I think that this is obviously not the debate that the Fetterman campaign wanted to be having at this point in the campaign, but they've kind of, through the stroke and then the recovery and then the use of this closed captioning technology to do interviews, landed themselves in the middle of a kind of a disability rights sort of conversation. And on its face, Ian's take does not really seem that bad to me. I think it seems reasonable to say that, look, we have lots of people with sort of different kinds of impairments. They need different kinds of affordances and assistances to do their work. I couldn't do anything without glasses. If Fetterman needs some help to do interviews, I don't really see what the problem with that is.
So the reason I selected this as a bad take is, to me, it represents the kind of almost sarcastic, maybe even belittling response to genuine questions that people have in the world who are not following every twist and turn and every micro development of what's happening in the Pennsylvania Senate race. Mm-hmm. And I think that it is important as journalists to remember that, when something unusual happens, like, we all know people with glasses. Mm-hmm. It's very common to wear glasses. It is not common to maybe have supported somebody in a primary and then that person has a stroke and then there's this unusual situation that unfolds with this emerging technology. And I don't think that the right-wing attack of, there's something wrong with this person, therefore he's not qualified. I just think that the reaction of the sort of left Twitter going very extreme and saying, so what are you saying? You can't have somebody with glasses, or are you saying, Tammy Duckworth shouldn't serve in office? And, naming other members of Congress over the years who've had physical disabilities. And to me, it's this I don't like it when the media, instead of saying, okay, there's this situation, like, let's calmly explain it to people of what it means to have a stroke and, what it means for Fetterman. And instead, it's almost saying you're dumb or you hate, you hate people with disabilities. And that is where I find it to be a bad take, that it was a chorus of chiding that I think turns people off. And like, if you're trying to create confidence and trust in the media, that this idea of, I don't know something, or I have a valid question of, should I vote for a person who has had a stroke and now I'm hearing he can't do small talk, and I'm concerned about that, which to me is a valid concern, like a valid concern for a voter to have, that to take the conversation to this place of sarcasm and you're dumb if you think this is a mistake. So that's my position on this.
Okay, I sympathize with that. I mean, I do think that, Ian's particular tweet was like maybe not the best way to express his idea. At the same time, to me, that frustration comes from the fact that the original NBC take, I found that to be a misleading and provocative way of the journalist to explain her situation, right? I mean, to have what I think is a closer analogy, if you had conducted an interview with a politician who is very hard of hearing and who uses a hearing aid, and the whole interview went great, but you did some small talk before the interview and the person couldn't hear you, and you just kind of like put out there, like, this guy couldn't hack it at the small talk. Like, I think that would be a weird way of framing what went on, right? I mean, it's sort of like decontextualizing it. Because to me, the subtext of what Republicans have been saying about Fetterman is that because the issue is a stroke and the issue is neurological, right, they would like you to believe that he is cognitively impaired, right, and can't understand conversations. Whereas I think the actual takeaway of this whole thing is that, like, he can read and talk and process language in real time totally fine, but he's having a trouble with his hearing.
Right.
And I mean, I think that NBC and then all the sort of, like politics, I'm like an opinion writer. I mean, you know that we worked together a long time. I just like fire off takes all the time. A generally frustrating thing that I think happens on Twitter is that there is a politics reporter Twitter that would tell you that, like, they are not columnists. They do not do takes. They don't say, like, here's my opinion, this or that. But every once in a while, something will happen that, like, they do really weigh in on. And this Fetterman thing generated all kinds of, like, eyeballs emojis and raised eyebrows and, like, wow, kind of stuff that itself was not, like, well-informed, nuanced discussion of stroke recovery issues. And I to me, like, it was basically correct for liberals to be mad.
So to me, the issue is this, right? That there is a concerted political effort by Fetterman opponents to paint him in a certain way. So they seize on this NBC moment to further that. And the reason it's an effective political message is that it matches a question on people's minds, right? That this isn't random. It is definitely a major issue in the campaign. So you have an organized force playing up people's maybe fears or intuition about what's going on. And then instead of having a forceful response to that rooted in science and fairness and in, hey, this is how you should think about it, it's just putting up the hand emoji or the eyeball emoji. And then it's like, well, who is right here? And if you're not into takes from reporters, etc., it's like, well, they're not even taking this seriously. And in doing so, I am being expected to just think this is ridiculous when, I don't know about a ton about reading captions or what happens when you have a stroke. And so it's this, like, you're saying, sometimes the left or the media gets frustrated and they lash out on Twitter. And I think that there's a responsibility to actually inform people. And there was some of that. I'm not saying there wasn't. It's just that I was surprised by the extent of the Ian sentiment.
Wait, I agree with you about the responsibility to inform. What I'm saying here is that I thought it was a lot of neutral, nonpartisan politics reporters who were irresponsibly playing up this NBC reporter's observation. And that, like, that's why liberals were lashing out at them. I mean, yeah, you know what I'm talking about, right? Right, Laura? There's a set of people at, like, Politico, Axios, the New York Times, the Washington Post, people who would look down on me, right?
Sure.
And they're like, I do real journalism, right? And so you ask them a question like, is it good or bad that Kevin McCarthy says he wants to have a debt ceiling crisis to try to cut Social Security? They'd be like, I have no opinions. I'm a reporter. But this sort of decontextualized NBC reporter observation came out, and they were all amplifying it. And people were getting really upset because it was like reporters, politics reporters, were not doing the work. They weren't like, I made calls to 3 neurologists and here's a story about, assistive technology, et cetera. So I both, like, I agree with you that, like, snitty dismissiveness is not a great look when the public is dealing with an unfamiliar situation. But I kind of feel like the blame was on the other side. But I'm curious, like, what do you think? Like, is it a big problem for a U.S. senator to have trouble, with spoken language without a kind of writing assist? Because it's different from needing glasses, honestly, just on the level that, like, if you put glasses on, you can see just fine. Whereas, you actually can't have this captioning technology available at all times. You can in the context of an interview, but, like, senators do have informal conversations with each other and staff members. And it seems like having a challenge, it seems like a deaf senator would face challenges. Like, you wouldn't want to say mean things about a candidate who's hard of hearing, but it also does seem like a significant practical problem.
Right. I want to just to back up one step of the kind of NBC overplaying this thing. Totally true, right? It was definitely, he was having trouble. And after the commercial break, we'll find out the reality. And it's like, oh, yeah, he's totally fine. He's not actually having a problem with his mind. He can comprehend what's going on. And that's very frustrating, and it's very frustrating. And I get that. And it is unfair that I think commentary or persuasive writing journalists are put in this position of being looked down upon in sort of the industry and media. But, you don't want to hear it. Probably not you, the broad strokes you of, if you see yourself as an outside voice, an independent voice in the media landscape, and you think that part of that means, part of being an opinion journalist or just like a columnist or an essayist or persuasive writer is that's your role. And rolling your eyes and getting into this kind of group sarcasm is not helping you. If your goal in life is to be an outside voice to shape how people think about things, it really does matter in these key moments. Like, this is when it matters. This is when you can have an impact on the debate. And it bothers me that when these types of voices blow it. And I think that's what happened here. Frankly, no one cares, right? Like, if I am interested in what's up with Fetterman telling me, NBC, the way that they, like, I don't care. Like, I don't care about NBC. I care about, is my candidate going to be able to do his job? And you're just rolling your eyes and telling me I'm a hateful person. So that is my feeling about the role of opinion writers, and I think it's important. In terms of what I think about it, I watched the interview and I thought he was completely fine as in terms of just somebody who could communicate. He clearly understood the questions. He could answer fully. To the extent to which small talk matters versus having a tool with you at all times. I mean, I just don't know how hard or easy that is. It just doesn't seem like it would be that hard for most conversations to be able to do this. I mean, C-SPAN is running near real-time captions.
Right.
It doesn't seem like it would be a big problem. And in terms of decision making, it's not the small talk where these decisions, you're reading the bill, you're talking with your staff. I don't think it's a huge problem. And I do think the closest analogy after kind of reading what is going on with him, it does sound a lot like somebody who needs maybe an ASL translator, which also an ASL translator, I think, is always on the floor. I'm pretty confident.
Right.
And in major addresses, you see the translator there in the corner and such. So I don't have a big personal problem with this, but it's more, I think I had a valid question. I thought, so what's the deal with this? And I went and watched it. And then there were a couple places that did some stuff on strokes and how they work. And I thought, okay, like I don't have a problem with this. But I had to say, like, I'm just going to stroll away from this conversation that's happening and find a different place.
So I agree. I used to do a little neurology corner. In college, I took a class that delved kind of heavily into the history of sort of like slightly odd brain mechanics findings that people discovered over the years. And I think something that most people don't know is actually how compartmentalized the different areas of the human brain are. So like there have been instances of people who suffered damage to a particular area of their brain and they then can't recognize people's faces.
Right.
But they're like otherwise totally, totally fine. Or there's an even weirder one. There's a very specialized function that lets you line things up. Like it's sort of physical symmetry. And that's why you notice, like, if you put your keys into a keyhole, you can do that quite easily, even though it needs to be very, very precise.
Yeah.
But like little kids really struggle with that. Like they can run and jump and play soccer, but they like can't put keys in a keyhole because it's a distinct like function that arises.
Like fine motor skill they haven't learned. Yeah, the brain hasn't developed.
Yeah. And so it sounds wrong, right? But like you can have damage specifically to how you interpret spoken words while still being able to produce spoken words completely fluently, to read, to do all, like all kinds of other language type stuff. And I think that's like a genuinely odd fact about the world. I think that we appear to ourselves to be sort of general purpose computers, but it's not actually true.
Right.
And there's all these very discrete kind of functions and processes. I think the problem for Fetterman here is that his own campaign spent so many months leaning so heavily into kind of vibes-based attacks on his opponent.
We should explain his opponent here, yeah? Set the scene.
Right. His opponent is Dr. Oz, who is a television celebrity doctor who lives in New Jersey, is a dual citizen of Turkey, is a veteran of the Turkish military, whose big thing is like peddling fake cures. Like we did an obesity episode that was focused on at least things that are in the realm of plausibility. But like all of Dr. Oz's ideas are like, eat these magic beans and your gut will vanish.
And he gets rich from that too. It's like
he's
not just out there like, but I just believe in this. It's like, no, he's not taking his own beans. Like he's just selling this. Yeah.
Right. So he's like this rich guy, like literally a snake oil salesman, who lives in a mansion in New Jersey, and he's running for Senate in Pennsylvania, and like nobody can tell why.
No, it's unclear.
And there's like lots of normal Republican Party conservative politicians in Pennsylvania, but Trump like really wanted, I don't know, like
a fellow TV carnival barker.
Donald Trump has a great deal of affinity for television personalities from the greater New York City area. But like why the Pennsylvania Republican Party went along with it, like, I don't know. So Fetterman had made a lot of hay out of this, and there's like endless material, like Dr. Oz at Yankees game. He's not even from the part of New Jersey that's near Pennsylvania.
Yeah, he has one ad that's so good. It's like, it's a quick drive, and then like the map, you're like, that doesn't look that quick. I don't know. So yes. Well,
and then he'll do in his things, and he'll be like, to counter the claim that he's from New Jersey, he'll say like, I grew up just south of Philadelphia. And you look on a map, like just south of Philadelphia is fucking New Jersey.
Yeah.
It's on the other side.
That's the line. Yeah.
Right. So the problem for Fetterman is that he had done so well making fun of Oz for being like a weirdo that it's hard now, I think, for Fetterman's campaign to backpedal and be like, guys, this should be a serious discussion about the policy issues, because he had been so effective at making this campaign like not be about the policy issues. And so then when Oz got a kind of also non-substantive attack on Fetterman, it kind of took what had been this really bright spot for Democrats in the midterms and kind of just kicked it back to Pennsylvania as a 50-50 state. This is a 50-50 race.
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem. I mean, Fetterman, even I'd say on his own, separate from Oz, kind of in the primary, he ran as this, he's like a tall, broad-shouldered guy, kind of white guy from Pennsylvania. He wears a hoodie. He's got a kind of real talk, union guy feel to him, and that was a big part of it, was his persona itself. You know, even before having to face off with Oz, he was like, I am me, myself as a person. This is what you're getting. You know, you're going to get a guy who drives a truck and, you know, is fair-minded and understands you and your problems. So it was really what was so attractive about him as a candidate was his ability to, you know, appeal to Democrats in the state and also crossover voters in Pennsylvania who you've got to win statewide. And so he was very appealing even on that level. And then, like you said, then he's running against, you know, a kind of kooky guy, and he is able to build up this contrast even more so. When he had the stroke, I mean, it was sort of like, well, okay, we've got the snake oil salesman versus the candidate who had a stroke. Like that's a whole different race. Yeah, I mean, exactly. And I think he's got to do two things. One, I think the Fetterman campaign has tried to do this, which is to explain to people, no, it's not that he can't understand people, it's that he needs this tool. And I think they've tried to clearly state that. They haven't hidden from it, et cetera. I think that they've been as clear as they can be on that front. But two, you got to change the subject. You know, you can't just keep, it's not going to be it's not a good way to go. So they've got to, you know, kind of distinguish themselves from Oz on some other front. Tuesday night, you know, just the magic of podcasting. You're probably listening to this on Wednesday, but Tuesday night I'll be watching Oz versus Fetterman on this debate. And it'll be interesting to see how much of it is you're weirder, no, you're weirder, versus Fetterman trying to pull it in the direction of having a conversation about, well, what are you going to do for Pennsylvanians?
So, yeah, let's take a break here. And I think it would be interesting to pull back into this kind of general question of like, what are campaigns about? So, you know, one thing that I think has become sort of vexing to journalists in an era of polarized politics is it seems like in general, the vast majority of people just don't actually care about, with like a broad wave of the hand, they don't care about any of the stuff that you report on in the course of a campaign. They don't really care that Dr. Oz lives in New Jersey and peddles fake medical information.
So I think you should be more precise in what you mean by it doesn't matter. It's the Oppo scoop revelations don't matter, right? It's the October surprise, you know, whoa, it turns out there's this tape and it's really weird and he's talking to this, you know, it's that stuff that doesn't seem to move the needle when you would think, oh, it turns out the guy, you know, sent a get well card to his ex-girlfriend when he paid for her abortion. Like that should certainly alienate people.
if you just tell me whether or not somebody voted for Joe Biden 2 years ago, I can predict with 95% accuracy who they're going to vote for in their congressional races with no information about who the candidates are, right? It's like most people are just, they're partisan voters. And that's frustrating to people who, like, our job is to like generate and analyze news developments.
Right.
But like, it would be really boring to just write every day, be like, Pennsylvania Senate race pits a Democrat against a Republican. You should probably make up your mind based on broad ideological considerations. But not only is that how most people make up their minds, but I'm inclined to say that that's how most people should make up their minds. Like, Herschel Walker seems like a really appalling person to me. But like, if you live in Georgia and you think abortion should be illegal, and you think there shouldn't be regulation of guns, and you think there should be big tax cuts, like if you're just like a Republican, it's like, why wouldn't you just vote for the Republican? And it's part of the reason the like pro-Fetterman backlash is so severe, is that if you're a liberal and like some bad story about John Fetterman comes out, you're not going to actually sit there and like weigh it and be like, well, how much will it impair his efficacy as a senator if he makes only a partial recovery from his auditory process? It's like, no, man. It's like, I want abortion rights, and I don't want like, you know, Vladimir Putin to run American foreign policy and whatever else.
Right. I think this season, we should talk about the landscape of candidates. The Republican Party has had just quite a few.
They've offered the public some unorthodox choices.
There are some unorthodox candidates running in various states, which we could talk about. What I think about with this is the number of times I would call regular people with real jobs, you know, that they go to every day and they go home and et cetera, like in my family, who at a holiday or something are lamenting and look at me and say, how can people vote for him? You know, they're talking about Donald Trump. You know, he's crass, he's terrible, he's this, he's horrible. Like, he's a horrible person is what it boils down to. And it's sort of like, well, what's the alternative? I mean, if you agree with a set of political positions and the person is terrible, but then you look over at your alternative and maybe the person isn't terrible, maybe, you know, it's an upstanding person, but the upstanding person is going to implement a set of policies that you are completely 180 opposed to. It doesn't make any sense to abandon your points of view and go embrace a totally other political ideology because you don't like somebody's, you know, personal conduct or the way they present themselves. It just doesn't work. And so there's this rolling frustration all the time. You know, there was the guy down in the South, and now his name is escaping me. He was lurking around shopping malls and stuff and like picking up children. And
Roy Moore.
Yeah. And, you know, that was a case. I mean, that was such an extreme case. And there, you know, anyway, but there was a candidate who kind of was able to thread the needle and pick up moderates. But it's this sense of frustration. And I think that the media, you know, we're out there covering this stuff, and like there's a desire to get the Oppo research out, or I shouldn't say just Oppo research, but tips and stuff about their past. Like there was this piece.
Scoops. I mean, to do
scoops, yeah.
Reporting and like bring information
and
to
break
light.
things and like reveal things about the candidate you didn't know before. Did you see this piece in Jezebel about how Dr. Oz, well, first of all, there were a lot of questions I had about this. It was number one, apparently he has a lab where he did studies, which blew my mind in and of itself. But two, as part of his studies, he killed a bunch of dogs. And it was like, wow, that's bad, you know? But I already thought he was a snake oil salesman. So it didn't really like change, you know, if you already are inclined, like if you were a Republican in Pennsylvania and you find out that the snake oil salesman that you already supported also killed some dogs creating his snake oil, that doesn't make you want to support, you know, Fetterman's policy agenda.
Well, and I mean, I hate having become an old person who has this opinion, but like, it's bad for the country, right? Like, it would genuinely be better if a higher share of elected officials were people of like strong moral character. And it's bad for America if that percentage declines over time. But the only way that you get a Congress full of people of strong moral character is if the voters punish candidates for scandal and misbehavior and things like that. But voters are increasingly disinclined to punish candidates for those sort of personal qualities. And I don't think the voters are making a mistake, right? The voters are responding rationally to the existence of very large policy divides between the candidates. And those policy divides themselves are a little bit of a puzzling phenomenon, right? Like there's a sort of classic political science idea that it's like, well, since both parties want to win the election, they're going to try really, really hard to appeal to the sentiments of the median voter. So they're in practice going to offer policy platforms that are quite similar. And we just don't actually see the political parties doing that on a practical level, right? Like Oz and Fetterman, when Fetterman asks, potential Oz voters to be like, look, don't vote for this skeezy guy from New Jersey, he's not asking them to make like a small difference in their policy convictions. He's asking them to travel like a large journey. And the same for Oz when he hits Fetterman over, health or whatever else. The Democrats and Republicans just run these days on very different platforms where, Democrats, with the exception of Joe Manchin, were lining up behind a multi-trillion-dollar permanent expansion in the size of the welfare state, while Republicans are saying they want to cut Social Security and Medicare in order to finance more tax cuts, right? And there's very few politicians running with like the Joe Manchin line of like, keep things roughly the same.
Right.
Which is weird because like maybe we shouldn't have dramatic change in either direction. Seems like a pretty normal opinion that a lot of people actually hold.
And it bears out. Look at the success of these candidates. You sort of see Susan Collins or Joe Manchin overperforming often. You look at nationwide and then you see overperformance. Actually, I shouldn't say that on Manchin. I'm not sure about that.
Well, you have a lot of governors, right? There's a Democratic governor of Kentucky, a Republican governor of Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And they're not doing that much because the state legislature is hostile. But those are the most popular governors in America, are state mismatched moderates who are people of good character, who are trying to deliver competent government, and who are not making dramatic policy changes. But like political parties don't want to nominate people like that.
Right. I mean, it's definitely, the idea is you got to motivate the base, air quotes, which sometimes I'm not even sure that that's the right way to think about it. What is the base? Is your base the furthest left or right person, or is your base the kind of moderate voter who will reliably vote for you? I'm not sure. But it clearly, in polarization, that's what's happened, is that once you're out of primary season and you've got two choices, it's really tough. There's no mechanism really to hold somebody accountable. Other than not voting, which essentially is the same thing. You're saying you might make you're making a statement vote, but it's essentially, in a tight race, people not voting is the same functionally as voting for the other side, or voting for a third candidate, same thing. So, I don't know how to fix that really. I think it's just sort of a truism of where we are, and I don't see how a two-party system can change that. I am sympathetic. I don't think it makes a lot of sense to abandon, say you have a set of principles in life and one of them is you don't think spousal abuse is acceptable, even if the spouse and the person, in the situation of Herschel Walker, he and his wife have made up after he, admits he was an abusive husband. Say your value is, I believe that we need models of marriage that are not like that. But you also have 10 other things that are important to you, like tax cuts or abortion or environmental regulation, because of, whatever job that you do, perhaps, you have a set of things. And so you're going to say, well, which things get sacrificed? And at the end of the day, whether or not somebody in their personal lives is not the most upstanding, that person is going to go to Congress and have a staff, and they will vote with the party. So it makes sense to me. And I think that I don't know how much I just in my life, I have a lot of teachers in my family and such. So it's just I'm surrounded by a family of a lot of liberals who are confused by why Republican voters are not repelled by a Trump-like figure or a Dr. Oz or something like that. And I think that's just hard sometimes for people to kind of open up their minds to the idea of people on the left that, well, they don't agree with you on any policy issue. They want to vote for a Republican candidate who supports their views. So I don't know, but this year was particularly wacky, don't you think? The slate of people.
I mean, it's a weird midterm because I think normally the president's party does poorly in the midterms. Nothing, Joe Biden has done some things that have minimized sort of policy-based backlash to him, but there's also this really serious inflation problem, and people are upset about it. So you would expect Republicans to do well. But then Republicans gave the world a bunch of real duds of candidates, to the point where Mitch McConnell was even saying, I don't think we're going to do as well in the Senate as in the House because candidate quality matters in the Senate.
Candidate quality matters was the quote.
Your candidates are really bad when the leader of your party is complaining that candidate quality mattering is a problem for him. And that then created over the summer this big sort of bubble of Democratic expectations that they were going to do really well in the Senate. Because part of what happened was that Democrats went up on the air with ads early, sort of making the case against all these sort of subpar Republican candidates. As you get down the stretch,
people are coming home. The polls are definitely showing, Republicans coming home as the reality of I'm going to go vote.
Yeah, I mean, political campaigns, right? The actual running of the campaign can accomplish different things. The easiest thing a campaign can accomplish is to be like, hey, listen, person who almost always votes for Republicans. This election pits a Republican against a Democrat. You should vote for the Republican, right? So suddenly they're doing way better. And I think that Democrats may look back on this and say to themselves, wait, when we got this weak field of opponents, we got arrogant and thought, okay, we can just beat these guys because they're kooks and scumbags. When what they should have done was said, hey, people who are worried about these kooks and scumbags, here's a little outreach. Here's a little policy moderation that I'm going to give you. Here's and there's some people who are trying this, right? I mean, I think Tim Ryan has tried this in Ohio. I think Jared Golden, who's running, I think you're not in his part of Maine, but further north of you, have done this. But I think that Fetterman and Mandela Barnes in Wisconsin and, some other candidates, they haven't quite done that. Fetterman has tried to win purely on a kind of polarized politics and what he hopes will be a vibes advantage.
Yes.
And the stroke is imperiling him because it is damaging his vibes, and even needing to go out in public and say, oh, disability, blah, 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 undermines the vibes, because the whole point of Fetterman was he's this burly,
right,
manly man guy from a small town. And I mean, I just don't know. I mean, I've become a tedious moderate in my old age, and I wish both parties would try harder to win elections. They spend all this money trying to win the elections, but they're very reluctant to make concessions to public opinion for the sake of winning elections.
Yeah, it's a sort of, why not do that? And why not try to win? Maybe throw out some popular ideas that cross party lines. You and I have talked over the years about minimum wage. We saw that in Florida, how it way outperformed. It passed by an overwhelming margin. So therefore, you've got people of both parties that were supporting it. And it's almost like, well, what if both parties did that all the time, where they found very popular ideas that reached a wide swath of voters and would pull in crossover voters to shore them up against, even this kind of a problem. I think that another place this is playing out, is the Cortez Masto race. I'm trying to remember exactly how she positioned herself, but it was definitely, she's running about somebody pretty conservative, a very kind of right-wing person. And now she's, the race, I don't know exactly the latest poll, if it's basically neck and neck, I think it would be fair to say. She had a pretty substantial advantage at the beginning, in the spring, and she had held steady. And now I was seeing, she's trying to get out the base, as it were, like she's trying to shore up the Latino vote. But I don't hear her doing this either, of saying, okay, how do I reach some of these crossover voters either. I don't know if it would behoove her to do that or not in this state of the race, but it's just another one where you're seeing it playing out, that I think that the campaign took into consideration maybe too much the person she was running against. And it's not like Democrats haven't experienced this. Like, maybe rewind the tape and remember the time that there was a wacky candidate running and the wacky candidate won, in 2016. And it's sort of a funny thing that, not funny, I mean, it's puzzling, learn the lesson. And I guess there is counter examples. You look at Clara McCaskill, who she pulled out a victory against Clay Aiken back in, I think that would have been 2012 or so, where she did paint him as very extreme. At the same time, she's a former prosecutor and is able to present herself, I think, in a kind of less diametrically opposed to a Republican candidate. So, she, I think, pulled a rabbit out of a hat in that situation. And maybe that lesson was overlearned by Democrats, that, if you have a weak candidate, run on that.
Well, I just think it's a little funny. I mean, I remember the 2004 election and the kind of aftermath of that. And Democrats were sort of, licking their wounds. And I think the Democratic Party was just much more ideologically moderate in the mid zeros than it is today. And back then, people would bemoan all the time that, like, people cared too much about this kind of, like, character personality questions, that George W. Bush seemed like a more fun hang than John Kerry. And if we could just get people to vote based on policy, like, we'd be in great shape. And in the Trump era, I feel like Democrats have almost, like, inverted this emotionally. And they're constantly like, can't you people see that the other side keeps throwing up scumbags? Like, why don't you just go vote for us?
Right. And it's not addressing the issue, which is that a lot of people are conservative and they value, they support Republican causes. So maybe that was part of the reason George W. Bush won, was because his ideas were popular. I think it matters. I do think, I don't understand how Jeb didn't win the Republican primary.
You're an old Jeb stan.
I am a Jeb stan. I don't understand. But I mean, I do understand, which is you still have to be good at campaigning. You have to be able to stand there and, like, be good. And he was just, I was floored by how bad he was. So you do need to have some manner of charisma. But you can't just have, you got to have, you have to have the positions too. You can't just stand there being like, I'm so charismatic. It's not going to work. Like, the fact is, what you actually believe matters.
Well, and I just think, we've done a bunch of episodes about different things, but, there's just a sense of, like, what are you offering people policy-wise? And, I think that the Democrats have become a very kind of, stringent group, right? Where the thing about Catherine Cortez Masto is not that she's particularly, like, super extreme or anything, but that I would struggle to tell you much about her other than that she's a kind of generic Democratic Party senator, right? She has not done anything to be like, I'm a proud Democrat, but I maybe, like, I break with the party on topic X.
Right. I break the party on this and whatever demographic she's trying to win over in Nevada. Like,
there's no,
hey, unions, you should really come out for me because of XYZ thing that I've been pushing for.
And I would say the obvious one, right, is that like in her state, an unusually large share of her voters are working class Hispanics who are mostly Democrats, which is great and good for them, but they are probably more conservative on certain, social and cultural issues. They're Catholics, et cetera, et cetera. And, she could do something there. She could do something anywhere. And that's just how politics kind of used to be. You expected that there would be a lot of state to state variation in what people are doing. We now have only a small number of people who really kind of break from their party at all. And to be clear, I mean, it's not like Republicans are doing anything on this score either. They're just in the current cycle taking advantage of the fact that inflation is high. So the default is that the opposition party is going to do well. But Oz, as he runs this campaign, he's not saying to people like, hey, if you're concerned that I'm going to back the most politically toxic aspects of the Trump agenda, like, don't worry, I get it. Pennsylvania is a purple state. I love Susan Collins, right? Like I shouldn't say nobody, but very few people on either side are trying to reassure voters who are worried about the activist bases of the other parties. And I feel like this is the most like lame point to make about politics, but it's true. They're not doing it. It's encouraging voters to then tune out all of these candidate specific factors, which is then encouraging like more flawed candidates and more just like snippiness from everybody to be like, how dare you even talk about this or that or the other thing? And it's like, it's bad for the country.
So I have been listening to this take from you for quite a while, and I tend to agree. I do. I think that that's a lot of what's going on here, and it's puzzling to me that the lesson hasn't been learned, that maybe reaching out to voters with ideas that are appealing to them hasn't become more common. I mean, I understand why. There is just pressure from the wings of the party to continue to move especially in the Democratic Party, continue to move left. I want to I want to give you the last sort of say on this, which is that how do you think, given where we are and given that, there's no magical solution that I see right here, right now. Do you have, what's your take on the solution? Do you have one?
No, I mean,
woohoo!
I don't know.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
No, I mean, look, I try to propound better information about the world to the extent that that's possible. I mean, I'm torn about the take that we started this with, because I just sympathize a lot with the frustration about the way that Fetterman interview was covered. But I also do agree with you that this kind of like snitty dismissiveness is not that constructive.
Well, and I think it feeds into the very phenomenon that you're describing.
Yeah, probably. I don't know. But even here, I'm trying to be a bad takes moderate. I feel like it wasn't like a great take. But I don't know. If it wasn't me, I wouldn't necessarily have called it out as like, here's my bad take of the week. I felt like it was an okay point.
I think it was bad. So there we are.
You can't always agree. Sometimes you have just a very polarized debate. So I'm going to do character attacks on you now.
I mean, that's fine.
I'm going to try to get voters to my side. No. I mean, I think it's good. It's okay to disagree, right? Respectfully.
I don't know. I think so.
You don't think it's okay? Oh, okay, you do think so.
I think so. No, I had to pause and think about it. Yeah, we don't usually our disagreements are around why something is a bad take, not whether it is. So maybe we are ending on a kind of unusual, uncomfortable note of just we're just gonna have to go live our lives knowing we disagree on this one.
Okay, well, but I think we can still be friends, and you out there,
Yeah.
the listeners, you can still be our podcast friends if you recommend this show to your friends, if you give us ratings, reviews, things like that on Apple, other places podcasts are found. It all really does matter, as the show has gained some steam and helps build an audience. We appreciate everything that you're doing out there. So this has been another episode of Bad Takes from Grid. Our producer, as usual, is Olivia Reingold, and we'll be back next week with more Bad Takes.